The world this weekend. This is James Cox. NATO planes have carried out more bombing missions in Yugoslavia this morning. In the last hour, the Secretary of State for Defence has confirmed that 12 extra British planes are to join the NATO force. In an interview for this programme, the Foreign Secretary, Robin Cook, tells me the campaign is going according to plan. We'll be asking if the attacks on Serbia this week are in fact legal under international law, and if not, if we should not attack a sovereign state. Does international law need rewriting to include intervention for humanitarian reasons?
Last night, an American stealth fighter came down about 40 miles from the Yugoslav capital. The pilot was rescued by US Special Forces and is now back at the Aviano Air Base in northern Italy. The Defence Secretary George Robertson told a news conference that NATO was concentrating on stopping what he called Serbia's campaign of repression against the Kosovo Albanians.
7 towns on the Albanian border are reported to be burning, and on the Macedonian border, as we've all seen on television, Jakovica is in flames. Thousands of refugees are streaming across the border from Kosovo into Albania, and there are also reports that civilians may be used as human shields to protect Milosevic's military machine. If that is true, this would of course be a war crime in its own right.
Thousands of refugees are flooding out of Kosovo into the neighbouring countries of Albania and Macedonia. The Albanian authorities say 1,500 people crossed the border this morning. The United Nations, which is flying it in 5,000 tents to provide temporary shelter, says Europe is facing its worst refugee crisis since the Second World War. There's been a gun battle outside the United States Embassy in Moscow, the scene of anti-NATO demonstrations. One attacker jumped out of a white vehicle and tried to fire a grenade launcher at the embassy. He gave up when police opened fire. The vehicle returned fire with automatic weapons and then drove off.
The war continues, indeed escalates, on both sides. The ferocity and speed of the Serbian attack on the Kosovo Albanians, described bluntly by the Secretary of State for Defence as genocide, seems to have surprised and shocked the Allies. The response has been to increase the attacking forces. But are they the right forces attacking the right targets? What, again, we ask the question, is the end game? In a few minutes, we have an interview with the Foreign Secretary. First, George Robertson, the Defence Secretary, gave a briefing this morning at the MOD.
We are increasingly switching our attention to the military thugs who are causing such misery and suffering directly at Milosevic's orders. And let them get this message, because we are going to hit them hard.
And he went on to promise greater efforts to prevent the Serbian campaign against the Kosovo Albanians.
I don't use the term murderous lightly. What we see of what is happening and what we hear from those who have managed to escape, and from reports by the UN High Commissioner for Refugees and the International Red Cross, are enough, more than enough, to convince us that we are confronting a regime which is intent on genocide. These airstrikes have one purpose alone, and that is to stop the genocidal violence.
George Robertson. While in the absence of independent verification, it is very hard to tell what is actually going on in Kosovo, though our suspicions must be that dreadful things are taking place, there is clearly immense fear in the province and a huge refugee crisis. Thousands have flooded into Macedonia, another but more autonomous province of the former Yugoslavia. Our correspondent Paul Wood reports from the capital Skopje, just 12 miles from the border.
This woman says people are being kidnapped in her hometown of Aruševac. She's heard of a family of 30 being killed in Drenica. I'm not afraid of NATO bombs, she says. I fled with my 4 children because I'm afraid of being massacred. I've been walking for miles, this old woman says. The Serbs came and put a gun to my chest and said they'd kill me if I didn't leave. The worst stories of massacres are allegations which can't be independently verified.
Just before we came on the air, I spoke to the Foreign Secretary, Robin Cook, and first asked him, as co-chairman of the Rambouillet peace talks, if he still hoped to get President Milosevic back to the negotiating table, or had that time now passed?
No, it's not passed. We've always made it perfectly clear the door is still open. And any time he wants, President Milosevic can call off the military action by making it clear that he's declared a ceasefire. To show he's serious, he has to pull back the troops that are carrying out the action and carrying out the atrocities against civilians at the present time. And he also must commit himself to negotiation which is serious, in good faith, aimed at reaching an agreement. The reason why the Rambouillet and Paris talks were ended was because Uber Vidrina both came to the conclusion that the Serb side was not negotiating in good faith, had no intention of reaching an agreement, and while they were talking peace in Paris, they were actually massing their forces for the offensive that's now going on in Kosovo.
Indeed, and there is no sign that that offensive is going to stop, so there's no hope of him negotiating, is there?
We are, as I said, keeping that door open. We're ready to negotiate whenever he wants to. In the meantime, we have a military objective. Since we have been unable to get him to engage in negotiation in good faith to achieve a peaceful settlement and negotiate settlement for Kosovo, we are now, by military means, making it more difficult for him to carry out the repression of the civilian population of Kosovo and increasing the cost of it.
Well,
That's the military objective.
Is that in fact the case, Foreign Secretary? Because surely, if anything, the attacks have aggravated his attacks on the Kosovo Albanians.
Well, I was very interested in the statement from one of the Kosovo Albanian leaders yesterday, who said that these atrocities had commenced before the NATO bombing. And
but they've escalated greatly since.
Well, we have seen for weeks him building up his tanks and his heavy artillery and his internal security police, both in Kosovo and outside it. Remember, this is a man who last October gave NATO an undertaking that he would have a ceasefire and he'd pull back his troops. He's now at double the number of troops he's allowed under that agreement. What you are seeing this week, to a large extent, was planned before this week. He was going to have a spring offensive. We've known that for several weeks. And suppose, James, that spring offensive was happening now and we had taken no military action. What would you be saying? What would the British public be thinking in those circumstances?
What's mentioned by government ministers like Mr. Cook of the Geneva Convention and genocide are interesting, because there is a question which has, I am told, been endlessly debated inside the Foreign Office and certainly fascinates academic pundits. Is the war against Serbia legal under international law? It is not a war of self-defense like the Falklands or conducted under sanction from the UN like the Gulf. It seems like a war motivated by pure humanitarian altruism, and as such is not covered by normal international rules. It is an invasion of the prerogatives of a sovereign state. But then again, can we stand idly by when a rogue nation carries out savage repression against its own people? Is international law an ass in this new climate?